So I'm glad to have a chance to sit and talk with you today, just because it's nice to talk things out and see how we're all thinking. So topic today is, kind of getting inside the head of an abuser, whether it's the wife or the husband, whoever the person trying to power and control over the other one is, kind of getting into their head, asking the questions, why does he do what he does? Why is she doing that? Do they mean to be harmful? So I'd love just to kind of pick your brain a little bit too on how to think about that, because it has a huge impact on how we coach people. Like, trying to figure out that motivation or figure out that why impacts what we do next, especially how we actually grapple with the reality of it and then decide what our next steps are. So would love to know your thoughts on why does he do what he does? And does he really mean to be harmful?
Want to unfold it at first. I was talking to Dr. Hawkins recently, and I thought about, we were talking about financial abuse and manipulation, and we're talking about people that never actually had education around finances. How would they naturally show up and be good together in finances? So what we're often seeing is people who never had a good model for relationships, who never actually saw what a healthy couple looks like, who are trying, like you've said before, trying to just grit it out and bootstrap it and figure out how to get through it without actually having a whole lot of experience in healthy relationship. So I think part of it, one, is that people don't always trust their own inner guidance system in their intuition and know, what does it actually look like when somebody's being abusive? Maybe their gut is off because they've been having an autoimmune disease for years because of the stress or what have you. So I think it might be helpful to define, what does it actually look like when somebody's in their right mind versus not in their right mind? So at least as a partner to somebody who's potentially being destructive or abusive, what might be happening? Are they being punitive, or are they actually just not really capable of functioning properly? In which case we would respond differently.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also important to define what we mean by in their right mind, right? Like it can be relative. Our experience shows us that there are things that are constructive in relationships and there are things that are destructive, right? Like, experience shows us that. But as far as what is right or wrong, tends to be a really relative topic, because like you said, someone who has no experience of something good, to them, that marker of what is right is going to be very different than someone who's had really excellent connections all of their life and experiences something bad. Like that marker, that line of demarcation is going to be different. And so actually setting up some sort of a paradigm of what really in your right mind looks like, without it becoming about trying to just diagnose someone or label someone as disordered. Because in so many ways, we're all disordered. We come into this world very immature and selfish and little monsters, and have to learn that we are not the kings of the universe and that other people are important too. So, essentially it's a matter of maturity to get more and more into our right mind. But obviously there's a lot that gets in the way of that process that keeps people stuck.
So it reminds me of Dr. Daniel Amen in California. He's a psychiatrist who was the one that coined the idea that psychiatrists are really the only doctor who don't look at the organ that they treat. And now with more modern technology and the ability to image brains and even image them in process while we're doing something or thinking something, now we can start to see a little bit more technically, what does a brain look like when it's in balance? And what does a brain look like when it's in dysfunction? So we're starting, I think, to have a little more insight, maybe, and to add to that, there are brain databases around the world where you could take someone's brain scan, send it there and say, can you give me a report, compare and contrast this against somebody who's in a similar age group, who has a similar level of education, and tell me what is different about their brain, what stands out to you, what might be hyperactive or what might be underactive. So there's a little bit objective that we could look at where we could say somebody might not literally be in their right mind. And then there are obviously the subjective things. How is somebody treating us? How do we feel in their presence versus how we felt other times? So I think we have a lot of tools, but it's more art than science to try to figure it out right now.
Right. It's almost like you're looking at the symptoms, so to speak, trying to figure out the organism rather than looking at the organism and making sense of the symptoms. So
yeah,
there is a lot of that, but I think that is the case as well, because it's not like you can't see personality. All you can see is the effects of a personality. You can't see these predispositions towards things. You can't see motive. You can't see connection. You can't see empathy. It's the outpouring of that you see. It's the effects of that you see. And so it makes it harder and a lot of guesswork because everyone sees things differently. And it's our prerogative actually to see things differently and to learn from that and to grow into, more and more wisdom and maturity. So that does make it really difficult, which is why there's so many versions of like the diagnostic manuals. There's so many versions of it because people are seeing things differently, trying to nail down something that can't be actually seen. Only the effects of it can.
Yeah. I'm sure you're familiar with the ACEs study that Kaiser did during the 90s, which looked at early childhood trauma and then tracked it across a lifetime for health and physical ailments. And so we would call that epidemiological, meaning you're looking at a large data set and trying to extrapolate out meaning from it. But the correlation is high enough that we can at least talk about it with some sort of reason and awareness. So the more early childhood trauma a person has, the more physical disease they have and the more mental illness they have. And I think that we could probably assume that that's something happening in the subconscious, coping mechanisms and ways of interacting with the world based on protective mechanisms that have outlived their usefulness that then cause disease. They diminish the immune system, or they result in behavior, drinking, smoking, acting out, that threaten lifespan and expectancy and quality of life. So I think we can at least probably assume that some trauma or a lack of a good childhood would set somebody's mindset into a different trajectory that would lead to choices that could be difficult for them and for their partners too.
Right. I think, with trauma, and the reality is none of us get through life unscathed by trauma. But trauma does predispose us to more and more see the world through a lens of threat. Everything is threatening, right? So the more extensive the trauma is, especially in childhood, the more likely the structure of the brain is changed enough so that even when things are good, it's still viewed through that lens of threat. Like, where's the other shoe going to drop? Like, I can't trust this because I know that for real, there's a monster behind that somehow. There's something dangerous here that I have to be on guard on, because what trauma does is it tells us no one's paying attention to me and it's all up to me to protect myself. So I'm the only one for myself. And of course, that's going to impact future relationships unless they practice doing things differently than that, unless they, take courage to step into a relationship, even if it looks scary or threatening or whatever, to give themselves a chance to experience, they call it a corrective emotional experience something different, and then actually take the time to process it so it doesn't just get dismissed because of confirmation bias. Like, unless someone has the wherewithal to do that, then they get stuck in those patterns of just, like, even in trying to love or care for other people, it's still very self-protective. It's still through that lens of, there's a threat here and I'm the only one that cares about me. In reality, I'm the only one that cares about me. I'm the only one that knows me enough to know what I need, what I want, what makes me safe, like that kind of thing. And so we don't even allow there to be that connection because we can't trust enough. And that impacts our conversations, that impacts our thinking, that impacts how deep our connections are, and very clearly correlates with the high levels of divorce and just broken relationships all the way around.
I like the way you described what you did, because you were sort of talking about what does it actually look like to retrain yourself, to rewire an existing predisposition for one reactivity but change to another. And it reminds me, I tend to be the geek maybe in the group that dives into science. And so when I think about the structure of the brain, the hindbrain is something on the order of 1,000,000 times more powerful than the prefrontal cortex, which is what we think of as consciousness. If you're overwhelmed, you're not going to be present and conscious because you just don't have enough capacity in that part of your brain to hold attention in space. So you're going to default to patterns that you developed and acquired earlier. If they're really good patterns, you're going to be a really easy person to be around, really likable, really considerate and kind. But if the patterns that you had, like you were saying, are defense mechanisms and protective mechanisms and narcissistic mechanisms where it's really about yourself when you're in that state of mind, you're going to act out and lash out without thinking unless you retrain yourself.
Yep. Yeah. So it's a matter of processing the trauma, thinking about what happened, but also actively, intentionally deciding, how do I want to show up differently? Sometimes it means role playing, practicing something different, like giving yourself eye contact in the mirror so that at least you're looking at somebody and repeating phrases, or, you know, just talking it through, because that is setting up a new pathway in the brain that may be more likely, more easily accessed when there's no blood in the front of your brain where your reasoning centers are. So I often tell people, you know, to practice some of these things. Just it's a healthy step, just so that you don't end up falling off a cliff somewhere with your behavior or your words or attitudes or whatever, because we're so easily triggered, especially still dealing with the trauma, so easily triggered. And if we can learn how to back up from that better, then we won't end up trying to recover so many of the pieces that get shattered when we fall off the cliff again. Whatever that looks
I
like.
hear you. I might use a different word for that, but I think about hormesis. You're a runner, aren't you? Or you run sometimes to be in shape as one of your things. That idea of looking in the mirror and doing things that are potentially uncomfortable and trying to find a way to be comfortable in it. So anybody that I work with will hear me talk about hormesis, which is really just the Greek word for the idea that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Got it.
So going to the gym, if we looked at exercise and we said, let's look at the biomarkers before and after you lifted heavy weights. You've got tearing of the muscle fibers. You've got a buildup of lactic acid. Blood pressure sometimes skyrockets. None of these things are good for a person, so don't do that, right? But then we look and see, well, what's the recovery and the integration piece? And how does somebody come after that into potentially better health and wellness? And the research shows that there's a dip down, but then the recovery is to a higher level. And so a lot of what we do with people is get them uncomfortable, but not so much so that they disconnect and they're triggered and they're gone. And then we try to work in that space where they're uncomfortable and they slowly develop capacity.
Yeah, I talk with people about that just in terms of their everyday life too, that, you know, being uncomfortable in and of itself isn't a bad thing. That strength training requires resistance, right? And so, you know, first of all, the world around us is not safe. There's not enough that you can do to make it safe. There's a lot of ways that you can use it, the world around you and the adversity, to become stronger, because that's what we need in a world that's not safe, is not to try to control what we can't control, but to be stronger in the face of it. And that requires adversity. We don't learn anything without struggle. We don't learn anything. When life is easy and good and you're sitting on the beach all the time, that might be good rest, but it's not building strength. Like, even to sit there long enough in that place of peace and safety and quiet and reprieve, sit there too long and you will die, because you need some resistance of life to actually provide meaning, to provide strength, to be a purpose, a mission, that kind of thing. So oftentimes dealing with all of this trauma is a matter of learning how to manage life in such a way that you're using it to grow rather than letting it overwhelm you to destroy you. So
I heard you in there sort of flip the script a little bit. So it seems like a good time to talk about a person who might be with somebody who's not behaving well, not in their right mind, not being thoughtful and considerate. Because you were also equally describing the person who's with that person, and what does their experience look like, and how do they decide what to do and who to be in the face of that? Yeah,
because no matter where you go, we have to deal with difficult people. And so, as we know, there's so many of the couples that we work with that do want to stay together, but for whatever reason, there's not the movement and growth within the context of the relationship that one or the other is looking for. And so a lot of our work becomes about helping the person trying to be healthier, actually be healthier in a context of their spouse is being exactly who he or she wants to be. And, there comes a point where we've got to just acknowledge that's what they're choosing for whatever reason. How do we use that to grieve what we need to? So grieve what it's not, grieve what our hopes and dreams were, without losing a sense of self, because those hopes and dreams and expectations are usually a good thing. They're written on our heart, so they're a good thing. We don't want to just shove them away, but we have to grieve that it's not the reality of this relationship, but then still learn how to navigate it in a way that there's good boundaries and yet room to relate with whatever the other person is offering, to whatever depth they are offering. Just learning to relate in that and still find space and purpose and meaning until, if and when something moves them to do something different, because it's a season of life. We have no idea what the future is going to hold one way or another, but we have to live today. So how do we do that and still be healthy and well, even if, our other partner in crime, so to speak, isn't really doing a good job of protecting us or caring for us, or, whatever it is we're looking for in the marriage.
I was talking to Dr. Hawkins yesterday because he and I recorded something. So we some of these topics, they all overlap because we're talking about people and interpersonal dynamics. And I was hypothesizing, talking about business and thinking about, if you were going to open a business or create a business from scratch, and thinking about who you want your partners to be in that business, you would be thoughtful and considerate about how you would choose them. The expectations would be quite clear in the partnership agreement. If they didn't show up for you in a certain way, you would talk about things, you would try to work through them. And then I think of marriage as the most important partnership that we would ever actually create, because not only is it a business relationship, meaning you have income coming into the household and you have expenses going out, and you're deciding on how you're going to spend your time together. You have financial goals. You're thinking about being a good partnership with regard to what you want to do with your time in the future and planning in that regard. You might have kids and you're trying to figure out how to be partners in that endeavor too. And then I don't understand sometimes, I get that it happens, but I don't understand why people can't see that level of partnership commitment requires the same kind of work and also objectivity in certain ways to work through things in a healthy fashion. What did we sign up for? What are we doing? What's the gap between what we said we were going to do and what we're doing? And let's try to work together to heal that gap.
I think one of the things that we run into is, first of all, the couple never really sat down and identified what they meant by partnership, right? So
Mm-hmm.
even if they had had premarital counseling talking about, how compatible are you and where are you going, the language they used might have seemed to make sense at the time. We love each other. We're in this together. We just want to be together forever. And, we're going to do this together. But they never bothered to really define what love means, for example. What does that look like for you? Because especially when we're young and
Mm-hmm.
all in love and feeling all of those emotions, we think we're saying the same thing. And then what often happens in the marriages is that we realize that their definitions are very different. And so even coming back to the definition of partnership, one might have come into marriage thinking that the partnership was going to look like she does everything in the home,
Sure.
the Christian norms of she takes care of the home and takes care of the children, and it's her job to just submit to him, and all of that kind of role. And while that sounds good in her eyes, there's probably also an expectation that means he's going to care for her heart and to love her, but they never really talked about what that meant, and so they miss each other, right? and
Mm-hmm.
then and then that partnership, the desire for partnership or the motivation to be on the same team ends up gone. And then what we end up working with is trying to even get them back on the same page to even define what a partnership looks like and decide
Yeah.
whether or not they want to be a part of it, and then talk about, okay, what do we mean by this? What does it look like? How can we talk about this differently so that we're actually headed somewhere constructive? Because our assumption is oftentimes when couples come for marriage counseling, the assumption is, well, they want to be in a partnership, right? And yet the
Right.
reality is the definition of partnership is all over the place, or one or the other really doesn't want to be in partnership. That's not what they came into marriage really expecting it to be. Their definition of what that should be is so different. It's just business-like or logistical or whatever, but only in terms of what that person wants. So there's no collaboration on what it looks like together. And then, of course, they end up hating each other. They end up in these conflicts that they can't get out of because there's no starting point for the conversation.
You make a really good point about the age, because I think about what little I knew when I was 20 or even 30 or sometimes even 40.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody had asked me to define what I wanted then, I probably would have wung it and come up with something just because it was what was required at the time. But it's been an incredible evolution into very different things. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
if two people don't evolve in their wants and desires with regard to partnership, there's inevitably going to be conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And some work to either compromise or give in or agree to disagree for a chapter as well.
Mm-hmm. I prefer to use the word collaborate rather than compromise. It feels so much more,
Compromise.
yes, because technically you're talking about the same thing, but it feels so much more proactive, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
collaboration requires giving up some things or reevaluating, really talking about things. But
Mm-hmm.
yes, we are going to evolve. That is what, like, when we're born, we know nothing. When we die, we know way more. So we're meant to grow and to change and to evolve and to better define our purpose, our mission, our sense of direction, and our sense of self. And even two people who don't really know what they want when they get married, they could potentially have an incredible relationship if they took the time to actually talk about it along the way. Here's what I'm thinking, vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
transparent, all those things that we long for in relationships. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I'm struggling with, without it being all about that fear of, if I show this about myself, I'm going to lose this relationship, or I'm going to lose my control, or I'm going to lose something, right? So
Yeah.
without that, which is a lie, because we actually lose more by not talking about things, by not being real, we lose more. But in the moment, it doesn't feel like that. It feels counterintuitive. If I tell him what I really think, he's just going to get angry and leave me, and I can't have that, right? That's simplifying what we think, but it gets to that. So anyway, evolving requires talking about everything. Doing life together looks like, hey, here's a new thought I had today, right? Don't know where this is going, but let's unpack it together. Let's just talk about it. And then if it's something meaningful, something both of us can learn from, what are we going to do with that? How are we going to use that to inform how we relate to each other, or relate to our kids, or relate to the world? Because life is stupid. So let's figure out our way through this in a way that's going to work for us, so we don't end up part of the carnage like our friends who never talk. And so
I'm glad you pointed out like the collaboration and the compromise piece, because it highlights that language is really important. And then two, it also reminds me that I think sometimes we're culturally influenced and we have our priorities wrong. A lot of the work that we do with people is them arguing over data and small ideas. But I think that the highest priority that a lot of people have at the beginning of partnership is to be connected, to be in connection. I want to feel connected to you. And when I do, I feel the happiest and the healthiest. But then somehow I'm arguing about whether we go to St. Bart's or we go skiing at Vail, and we're disconnected. And if we just for that moment remembered, oh yeah, more than anything, I like to be connected with this person, because when I am, everything is fine. So I think culturally we're really influenced, and you see it sort of in the legal system, and you see around the political system and what's happening in the world. People posture and they move to one side or the other very quickly, as if that's somehow gonna make something better. But almost everybody I've ever met, they feel better when they feel connected.
Yep. To be seen and known is what makes us feel loved and connected, right? And I think we get stuck in arguing, that minutia, those details, because we feel unseen and unknown. And so we think if we could just get them to see what I need or what I want or what I'm thinking, say it a million different ways to get them to see it, it's going to bring back that connection. But in the arguing is that shield, that brick wall that makes you unable to connect. So you're destroying the very thing you're trying to get because you're working so hard to be seen and be known. So that just requires, the capacity to hear someone else without losing a sense of self, and then to talk about it like, okay, I hear you. We can do both. So let's figure out how to do both, rather than arguing over what you want versus what I want. And, that kind of thing, that kind of idea. Let's collaborate on what's going to work for us, because so many of the rules that we bring into relationships are opinions. They are man-made opinions, cultural norms, religious norms, whatever, that are just dysfunctional. They might have worked for that couple way back over there because of whatever they had going on in their minds or their hearts, but
because they were still writing on stone tablets.
Exactly. And it's not going to work here. Like I said, our experience teaches us that there are absolute things that do build relationships and tear down relationships. So there are absolutes in there. But as far as how we get to those places, there's all kinds of ways to be constructive that might work for one couple that totally don't work for another, because of where they are, how they're thinking, what their maturity level is, how many kids they've got, like whatever. The dynamics are just different, and it's okay. That's the other thing we get hung up on is, well, that's not okay. Is it okay to be this way? Yes. If it works for you. So
I don't think I've ever had a conversation internally about this topic, but I think you're the one that I'd like to have it with. Because a lot of our client base is Christian, and because Christians typically believe in marriage as an institution for life, unless something very significant happens and some of that's defined. people stay together for a long time, even in the face of difficulty in relationship. And so the topic we're talking about today is sort of getting inside his mind, but really the mind of somebody who's treating you poorly in the face of a long-term committed relationship. Do you think that the faith commitment sometimes means people are more likely to act in terms of cleaning things up or being open and honest and clear and trying to get to resolution, or less likely to act because they worry in sort of using the thermonuclear option that they'll break it irrevocably? Meaning, if you can't do this, a healthy boundary, if you can't stop verbally abusing me, I'm going to find an apartment and we're going to separate, for example. That seems like such a dramatic move, especially in the face of a committed long-term relationship, that it wouldn't seem for a lot of people like a reasonable choice to make. So they might defer doing something that feels like a principled boundary because it would put some other idea at risk. And I'm curious to get your thoughts about how the people that you work with navigate that, both recognizing the commitment and at the same time trying to create a healthy environment where they feel safe and secure and supported.
I definitely think the faith element adds a nuance that makes it harder to look at all the options, because there's that piece of, if I even think about putting space in this marriage, I'm dishonoring God, and there's nothing I would despise more than to dishonor God, right? There's that piece of it. It's such a faith, and it's huge and it's sacred. So there is that. But I think what also happens in that is, it also, like you just said, it's because of that fear that, their spouse won't respond in a healthy way, that it's going to automatically mean now they're falling off this cliff that is so sacred to them, but nothing they can, like, it's so hard to reckon that there's nothing they could do about that. And yet this was such a sacred thing to them. So that does add that additional nuance. I think, coming from a Christian point of view, I think Satan has a huge vendetta against marriages, right? And so not only is there that faith piece, the last thing in the world I want to do is to dishonor God and my commitments and covenant and reflecting him to the world and all that, but we have a very real enemy that wants to make sure that we never connect, because it's in the context of a good, healthy marriage that the love of God is really seen to the world, shown to the world. And so with that spiritual aspect as well, I think there is not just that desire that, I don't want to dishonor God, but there's also the lies being spoken into your head. You can't do this. You can't even think about leaving him because it would dishonor God. And then all of this becomes a distraction, right? Your job is to submit. Your job is to just pray and wait for God to step in. It says he will avenge. And so you forgive and you keep going. And like, all of that sounds good, but it becomes a distraction to not really take a stand against the sin happening in the marriage, right? It's because there's such a huge sense of, I can't talk about that sin, because if I confront the sin, then I'm left with this option of divorce, and I can't do that. Or I'm left with this option of, like, I'm breaking up the family, or I just can't. So it's this huge dichotomy. And a lot of times I feel like they have to choose between the lesser of two evils, right? And then they're recovering from this huge, egregious sin against their own selves for having to make this choice, when in reality, they're having to make a choice in a space where someone else, a wild card, has free will as well. And no, it's not something they wanted to have to make, but there is still a way to walk through that. Standing true to who you are, standing up against the sin, having good boundaries, still honoring God, even though none of it looks like we're told he created it to be. So it is really hard having that faith aspect. I think the teachings of the church haven't helped, because they have just perpetuated the idea that men can do what they want to do, and a woman has no authority whatsoever to confront him on it. And so she stays stuck in these cycles. He stays stuck in them as well, not even realize how much damage he's bringing to his own soul, because he chooses not to even think about doing something different. And doing something different in my book means talking about everything, looking at what is not building up the relationship, getting away from the distractions, quit chasing all the rabbits. What's the point? The point is we want to be connected, like you said. We want to be connected. How do we do that without listening to all of this other stuff that's distracting us? What needs to happen for us to learn from our trauma, learn from our corrective emotional experiences if we've had them, put it all together and decide, how are we going to do this so that we stay connected? Because the number one way to truly walk in victory, so to speak, truly walk life well, is to not succumb to the lies or the oppression. I tell people all the time that accusation, condemnation, oppression never lead to life. They lead to death. God always leads to life. And so if they're looking at all of these things and they're just finding their soul moving more and more towards death and darkness and oppression, something is wrong. And so it's worth reevaluating the commitments, the covenants, what is sacred to them. Because if, again, we have a very real enemy that wants to twist the truth just enough that you miss the point. And if you're missing life and freedom and light and bringing a sense of self to the table in life, you've missed something.
I like the way that you describe sort of the difficulty of having to choose between two evils or two bad choices. And it makes me think, where did the break happen? If somebody's in a situation where they're trying to struggle with their faith commitments and their commitment to self, I think it'd be curious if they went back farther, pulled on the string all the way back to the beginning and started to look at, well, where did things actually start to go wrong? And what would healing look like if we were dealing with the root cause, not the symptoms of what's happening?
Yeah.
And start from there.
I think there's so many nuances that go into that. Probably the biggest piece of it is just maturity, right? Like, again, learning to live life, and for both ends of the spectrum, for a woman, for a man, both sides, like we have to learn how to find our own self, our sense of self, really what our faith is or our commitments to life are. And a lot of times we come in, especially when we're young, married, we come into this relationship looking to the other person to actually define so much of that for us, right? Some people come into marriage in a little bit healthier place than others. So there is a little bit more peace to begin with. Although, because we work with a lot of marriages where, on the honeymoon, everything changed and there was no peace, there was no foundation of anything. But I've worked with marriages that, they started out good, but in the evolution process, lost something along the way. And I think what gets lost is that sense of the self. Like, ultimately, this isn't about the marriage. The marriage just ended up being a crucible that forces us to have to learn and to grow and to look at ourselves and to find some solitude in the aloneness in a way that it's healthy. And I think a break happens a lot of times in that process. We can't stand the idea of being alone, right? And yet we're alone in this marriage. So what we're hanging on to is an idea in our head and a lot of not good stuff, but it's coming to grips with that solid sense of self that doesn't require that other person to tell me who I am. So I think some of it starts there because I'm a firm believer that recovery, healing requires coming out of hiding and learning to know who you are and where you're going. What are you bringing to the table? So that's what I'm talking about in that space is what are you bringing to the table? You've got to figure that out. And a lot of times that's what you're figuring out the first years of your marriage. And, but if you never get to talk about it or when you do, the other person just internalizes it as an offense rather than, hey, here's information to work with, then you get stuck in that place and the rift grows bigger because you're not able to collaborate on what you're learning, how you're evolving, where to go from there. And then if you add additionally onto that, habitual patterns of abuse, powering over, being angry, just the complacency of not doing something different, well, then you just compound all of that and make it bigger. And so, yeah, I try to bring it all back down to, you know, even when I'm doing couples work, is who are you? Do you like the man you're showing up to be? And if not, let's do some work on that. Do you like the woman you're showing up to be? And if not, let's do some work on that, because that's what gives us the materials with which to talk about doing the marriage. Everything in the marriage context is symptoms. Everything is a symptom.
I think about the things that we haven't completely processed coming out of childhood. I think that we seek a partner to continue that work. Because they reflect back to us the pieces that we have yet to fully integrate, understand, and evolve from. And so I will often tell people, especially in struggling situations, if you want to end this, like, I respect that, but end it after you've learned every lesson that you need to learn in this situation. Don't end it because you're uncomfortable and you don't like what's happening. Figure out how to be fully you, calm, cool, collected, straightforward, in charge of your own perspective, advocating for wellness for everybody. If you do all of that, and at the end you can say, I really know why I was in that relationship. I understand now why I chose that person. At that point, if those two people continue to walk together in health, fantastic. If one evolved into that perspective, but the other one wasn't capable of showing up in any way to acquire any of those same kinds of experiences and understandings, it's a little tougher. Maybe we can talk towards the end now. If you're one or the other of these people, what would you do next? And how would that look? So let's start with the person who maybe is behaving badly. And we've tried to define what that might be and why, what set that into motion, whether it's always been that way or something happened, a mental health issue or a physical ailment. Sometimes we deal with people that have chronic pain and they're clearly not able to be patient and considerate as they would if they weren't. Let's say you're that person and you're acting out. What would the work look like for that person at all places along the continuum? Obviously, the ones who are completely unwilling to admit that I'm actually doing something that's undermining my own life and the people around me. But somewhere where somebody can listen, what would be the thing that would typically happen next with them? And what would that trajectory look like if they were really willing to show up to work?
If they're really willing to show up to work, that definitely makes it much easier to change direction. I think oftentimes what it looks like is just getting down to the nitty-gritty of what's bringing the destruction to the relationship, like just specific patterns of behavior. And, you know, what are some ideas then of what we can do to do differently just to invite the spouse back into something to engage in some way. I think. So
is that singular work, one-on-one work that you're describing, or at that moment, is it ripe for the couple to be together if one person is behaving badly, but they maybe have understanding of it?
If they're behaving badly and have understanding of it, I think most often I prefer the individual work, because then I can, you know, talk with him, I can be direct. I don't have to beat around the bush without him feeling like, oh no, my wife is hearing all this and she's going to use it to, you know, say something, and then be so distracted by what his wife might be hearing. Same thing with her. Like, I want to be able to help her think without, you know, him sitting over there, her feeling like he's sitting over there going, okay, he's just getting more weapons to harm me later. So I prefer the individual work, although what the couples work looks like is, okay, so how do we talk about things differently so that you're inviting the conversation rather than shutting it down? You know, the couples work actually does end up more often becoming about how to have a good conversation, which, like, again, communication isn't the issue, but if you can't talk about things, then you can never resolve the issues. And so most often couples work revolves around that, because the idea is we're working on the issues individually at the roots, so that what they're bringing to the table to talk about is different. So with him, you know, if he's got an awareness of what's going on, he really wants to change that, real recognition that he is losing his wife and that matters to him, then we have some motivation to change. So tapping into that internal motivation, and then giving practical, like, the information in and of itself isn't going to change anything. He has to have practice walking it out differently. It's the implementation of the information that makes a difference in his life. So, you know, sometimes guys have a hard time really understanding what implementation looks like. So sometimes we have to really define that. Sometimes it's just a matter of them going, well, I never thought of it that way before, but here's what I'm going to do differently. And then the work with her is about, you know, still finding her sense of self, her own identity.
Pause for a second. So
okay.
I want to define when I think about the implementation piece. So I often talk about it as the awareness will get you to the starting line. Oh yeah, I screwed up. I lost my way. I behaved badly. I feel terrible. But when I'm overwhelmed or stressed at work, that's just how I am. And so full understanding that I need to evolve my way of being. Otherwise, I'm going to put some other thing that I care about more at risk. What does the work look like? Is sometimes I have a man that was in a recent core group. He showed up every time. He was lovely in group. He did all of his homework assignments perfectly. He was a straight A student in the understanding of the concepts, but in how it actually happened in his life, I'd say I'm not sure he's doing anything. And so I think it's really key to talk about this, because it's sort of any habit that you want to begin to create in your life. It could be flossing your teeth. If you understand the value of flossing your teeth from a dental health perspective, and you read everything, every journal article ever written, it doesn't make your teeth healthier. It just makes you understand that integrating that habit is actually going to be the thing that changes your life. So maybe we can define more. So people that you see who do really well in the implementation piece, who actually understand and integrate and then begin to carry it into their marriage, do they come to you once a month? Do they come to you once a week? What happens in between? How? Because I think people need to understand a bit, for the ones that we see who really succeed, what kind of work are we talking about? Is this window dressing, changing the orientation of the furniture in the room, or what is it really?
So, so I can think of a couple that I've worked with over the last, it's probably been a year, maybe a little bit more than a year that we've worked together. He started out in a core group. She did a redeemed group. They did a one-day intensive with me, I think, prior to both those groups. And they both did the work of the groups, but it ended up a few months later, I think, that she kicked him out of the house. So had that moment where they had a lot of information under their belt, but she was done with the same old. Like, he answered all the right questions, he did all the right stuff, he checked all the right boxes off, but it wasn't really changing the dynamic at home. So she kicked him out. So immediately he set up weekly sessions with me, and he was actually way more serious this time about getting some work done, because he realized he really, really didn't like being in his own apartment. He hated that, even though home life was miserable too. It's being in his own apartment. So they had intended it to be 6 months, and then they were going to reevaluate. And this whole time, every week he's working with me. I've given him homework to do. I'm making him answer questions, having him tell me how he's thinking about stuff. So it's not just me giving him information. I want to know how people are wrestling with it. So I'll ask the questions. What are you doing with that? And poke around deeper than probably they'd like, but, you know, really saying, how is that working for you? Right? Is that really working? And making him have to take an assessment. Is this changing anything in you, first of all, because that's the point. And then is it inviting your wife into something different? And he was separated the whole 6 months, hated it. Not really. They were not even really sure at the end of that whether or not he was moving back home. But he did end up moving back in the home, but the rules were all different, and he had to be okay with that. He didn't get to rule the roost anymore. And he had so damaged the relationship with their teenage kids that, you know, he pretty much, like, they knew they had to listen to him, so to speak, but he knew that in walking this out to repair the relationships with them, this couldn't be about him telling them what to do and lecturing them and yelling at them for leaving their bikes in the driveway and that kind of stuff. It was, he had to change everything, and he did. So, you know, their relationship, they're actually going to do a marriage renewal ceremony this summer that they've invited me to. So I'm excited about that. But I watched him really, really, really struggle with staying motivated. Why is he doing what he's doing? Because none of it felt good to him. He didn't like the work I made him do, the books I had him read, the questions I was asking him. Like, he didn't like crying in front of me. He didn't like it when I had to say, you just have to put on your big girl panties. And like, he didn't like any of it. But there was something in him that knew he really wanted this to be different at the end. And so, you know.
For anybody listening, this has been my experience too. That you're describing a situation where somebody did threaten a bigger change in the marriage unit and brought him to a place where he had to make some serious decisions about what he wanted in his life. Sometimes that's actually what has to happen. The other piece that you highlighted, there's a great book, New York Times bestselling book called Atomic Habits by a guy named James Clear. What he says that you were describing beautifully is that the bad habits have a very positive and immediate feedback loop. Cocaine, drinking, smoking cigarettes, eating junk food. Very good habits have a difficult and often negative feedback loop at first. And so we go through a lot of adversity to change a part of our personality that isn't working, and it takes time and it's uncomfortable to become the thing that we actually want to be. So anybody who's sitting here thinking, this is going to be easy or I'm going to enjoy the process, is really unlikely that that's how it's going to look for a good habit that's going to be integrated over time.
Right. Yep. So it's swinging back around to our original question, why does he do what he does? I think one of the answers to that question is that it's easy, right? He does what he does because it's easy. It's lazy. There's that immediate, you know, when someone is in a fit of rage, they're getting an immediate sense of, I am in control. I am on top of the world. Everyone is bowing to me. This feels good, right? That immediate reward for a fit of rage. But there's nothing about that that actually gets him what he really wants, right? He's not making room for connection. He's not actually in control of anything. In fact, he's very out of control and doesn't realize that. But it's that feedback, like you just said, that feedback of, well, this works for me. But the laziness, the passivity, which all of us are inclined to because we would way rather sit on a beach and do nothing, it predisposes us, especially when we're not properly motivated, it predisposes us to go, well, that felt good and that worked. So we'll just smooth it over, go on with life as if nothing ever happened. And who cares? Because there's also that realization of, you know, I don't really see that going anywhere, right? I know that's not really going anywhere, but I sure liked the fix. I liked what I got that moment.
In that dynamic, you're describing something where the person is much more attuned to their own needs and behavior in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about this, I'm a kind of a new dog owner. I have a 1-year-old puppy. And sometimes I'll get frustrated at something that he's doing. And I'll be lashing out in whatever way, either to discipline him or to put him somewhere so that he stops doing that thing. But in that entire interaction, I'm not watching him. I'm not looking at his biological reaction. What is happening in his face?
Mm-hmm.
Is he getting meek under the face of my getting big and bad wolf like? And so I think that the minute that you start to look at your audience and you realize what's the end result of me behaving like this, and you can see it somewhat objectively, you stop almost immediately, because you're like, that's horrible. That's the last thing that I want to do if I want these people to be my team, my family, my connection.
Mm-hmm. I think another thought in that too is that there are some people that don't even have that awareness of what they really want.
Yeah.
Like they get stuck in those moments and they might acknowledge the look of devastation on their kids' faces or their wife's face or whatever. But instead of it going to that place of, oh, wait, this isn't what I really want, it's like, oh, whatever, they need to get over it because I need this or I want this or what. And so it's not good.
Sure.
There's brokenness in there that has to be worked through as well. And sometimes it can't be, right? I've seen people go to their grave as mean as ever with years and years and years and years of counseling under their belt. And so there is that. And I guess going back to the other thing you kind of brought up too is the other side of that. Like if she chose to stay with him who is like that, what does that process look like as well? Because there's no sense of recognition that he would want something different. He's quite fine being the way that he's being. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on, so what do you do with a wife that wants to stay in a place that is potentially so harmful?
So the one thing I want to just say first is some of our best examples in life are of what not to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So people are often holding in high regard something that somebody did that's really admirable. But some of my best teachers have been people who are horrible in their behavior, who went to their grave without changing.
Mm-hmm.
Because you watch what they end up creating in their life, and it's often the opposite of what you want to do. So if you want what they have, do what they do. It's a really clear recipe. And if you don't want what they have, then get ready to change, because your behavior isn't leading you towards something healthy. It's leading you towards that example, which you don't want to emulate. So on the other side, the person who's in the face of somebody who's treating them unfairly and trying to figure out what to do, I sent you a link to a video that was Brene Brown talking about, she was talking about two things. One is, are people doing the best that they can? And it was a research project that she did, and also talked about with Russell Brand. But the thing that struck me at the end of that video was she said that the most compassionate and empathetic people are also the most boundaried. And that leads me to think, how does somebody want to feel? You're often asking the question, what kind of person do you want to be? Like, who do you want to be, right? How do you want to feel? And often how you want to feel dictates how you're going to treat other people. If somebody's treating me unfairly, but I want to create a model in my life of treating people fairly, it wouldn't make any sense for me to do something that breaks my model, that goes against it. I should continue to treat them fairly, but set up the environment so that I'm boundaried and safe if they're not taking care of my livelihood and well-being as well.
Right.
So, and people in our world, I've seen a lot of times, if a relationship is unbalanced and the pendulum has swung all the way to one side, where someone's behaving badly and the other person's feeling trauma, what I often see is that maybe the trauma stops, but the other person is so frustrated and angry and finally able to feel that they begin to behave what we would seem to think is badly and justify it by saying, you've treated me like that for 30 years. This is nothing compared to what you've done. But I worry that those people are integrating patterns into their behavior that they're going to be unable to unravel. They're behaving badly for long enough sometimes that they forget how to behave well.
Right.
So I always err on the side of good behavior. And so you can behave well and you can be connected to your core values and draw clear and distinct boundaries.
Right.
And so that's what I hope for the people that are in this situation with somebody. And the boundaries are staggered in terms of intensity. At first, the boundary might be, I'm just not going to talk to you for a few hours because I don't feel comfortable in the way that you're treating me and we're violating our agreements right now. It might need to escalate to, I'm going to go sleep in the other room, or you're going to get an apartment, or we're going to do a therapeutic separation, or we're going to bring somebody in to oversee this because we're out of our depth in being able to do it ourselves. And at every stage, your boundaries change based on the inputs that are happening in the relationship. But I don't think there's ever a time for somebody to lose their core values and the kindness and empathy that they also want for their partner to extend towards them.
Right. I tell people all the time who, like, I'll have someone say, well, I tried to be nice and it didn't work. And I am always like, what do you mean it didn't work? It didn't make him be different? Well, that wasn't the point. You're nice because you're a nice person, right? That's true to your character. If you let that be the measuring stick, the reward of why you do what you do, you're going to get much farther in life, because it's manipulation to do something to make him respond, which never, that doesn't land well with any of us. Like, well, you're right. If I'm doing what I'm doing to make someone else do something, that is manipulation. And so if you're using that as the marker, you're always going to feel crazy, feel crazy, because it's not true to our character to be manipulators either. So reframing that. Why do we do what we do? Because it's true to my character. I am a kind person. I am a conduit of grace and mercy. I want to move in this space regardless of the people I'm around. However, what they are offering to me is going to depend how much time I spend with them, how much towards my inner circle of friends they get to hang out in, and whether or not I make room at my table for them, right? Not because I'm acting in a way to make them do something, but I am staying true to who I am, giving them room to show up who they are. And the boundary is how much I invite them more into my space based on whatever behaviors they have going on. And so when you can learn to move within any relationship with adaptability and flexibility, what that looks like is not just showing up well, but also being able to identify and recognize to what depth of authenticity the other person is offering us, because we can only connect to what is authentic. And so, if someone's offering us only a little bit of, how's the weather and how's the kids kind of thing, like, we can totally interact with that and be fine. If we're expecting them to be deeper than that when that's not what they're offering, we're going to run into conflict. Or if we don't have good boundaries and we allow ourselves to just hang out with people that are destructive, there's going to be all kinds of conflict with that as well, because that's us not paying attention to what the other person is offering. And none of that is about our identity, our worth, or our value. That's us bringing us to the table. So that's where that balance is of knowing who you are and where you're going, being authentic to yourself, but also having good boundaries in place. And,
it's a beautiful description. I sometimes look at Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, the beginning of the book, and this is a book that a lot of people have in their houses. The beginning of the book talks about what it means to be core or principally valued. And it talks about what happens if you're not. And a lot of people put their marriage above their own principles. or the keeping it going, or the feedback loop from their spouse. So I think they lose their way. And it's really key to know who you are, how you're wired, what's important to you, and to simply advocate for that straightforwardly, without any control or manipulation. This is who I am. If you want to be with me, this is what it's going to look like.
Yep.
One, also from the Atomic Habits book, there was an example of a woman who lost a lot of weight. And she started her weight loss just simply by asking the question all day long before any major decision that impacted her health: what would a healthy person do? She didn't always know, because a lot of her choices prior had led her to where she was, overweight and out of shape and unhealthy. But she had enough data, and it's easy with the internet, to just go out and seek what generally would a healthy person do. And I think I would probably ask that most people out there do the same in relationships. At any moment where you can take a pause and resist the urge to be reactive, ask in that moment, what would a healthy person do right now? And the answer might be nothing, or take another hour because I have no idea, or give them a hug and say, I'm so sorry, or it's an unlimited basket of things to do. But when you wait and pause, you actually have access to it.
Right. And it's okay to not know. Like, it's hard for us to give ourselves permission to be okay with not having a clue how to respond. Right. And then taking the time to do something to find out how to respond, giving ourselves that permission. Because it's hard. Like, we're all in some sort of self-protect mode to some extent. Right.
Sure.
And a lot of times that means I can't show any weaknesses. I can't show that I don't know. I need to have it all together. Like, that's part of that facade of, I'm strong and I'm in control of myself, and that self-protection. So learning to give ourselves permission to be raw and messy and have no clue, but a willingness to figure it out. Actually, it's scary and it feels counterintuitive to walk in that kind of space, but way more fun. It makes life way more of an adventure when you can go, I don't have a clue, but let's go find out. And let's figure this out together, and then decide, what do we want to do with it?
And people like us more.
Yeah.
How brave to actually show your vulnerabilities.
Yep.
Yeah, for the person who is maybe aware of their bad behavior, some of the work is probably self-reflection work they can do themselves. But I think you gave a great example of this one guy that you worked with for 6 months during his separation. And that kind of work is key, with somebody who can hold you accountable, sometimes push in ways that you're uncomfortable, so that you can go into areas of growth that you otherwise wouldn't choose. So that's that for the person who's listening, who is ready to do something and they have no idea what it looks like. That's probably a lot of how it looks. And for the person who's with that person, you have a lot of choices, but one of them is not to give up who you are and behave in ways that are outside of your own belief system.
Right, because that won't get you into a better place either.
Never.
So yeah, trying to find that space. And it really is about learning and growing. We're not done till we're dead. Like, we're not trying to get to a destination and park it there. It's always about learning and growing for all of us, no matter what end of the deal, the perspective we're on. It's all about learning and growing and becoming more and more true to ourselves. And even from a Christian perspective, that means, really looking hard at who God is calling us to be, and making sure that that's in terms of reflecting Him to the world with truth and life and freedom, not oppression and accusation and condemnation, because that's the distraction. But just owning that, give you a sense of mission and purpose, and then talking about that in any of your relationships, but particularly marriage, in a way of really deciding, how are we going to do this together? Because we live in a world we cannot control. We cannot make the world around us safe enough for us to ever be healed by the world. we have to figure out how to navigate it. And so, yeah, just walking through it that way with a realization that you're not always working with someone who wants to do that with you, right? So being able to say, how do I do this? Should the other person decide not to? How do I still be healthy and good and congruent and find life, even with all of the grief that I have to carry at the same time?
And to add one piece to that, sometimes, you know, we're walking parallel paths, sometimes right next to each other, but sometimes those paths diverge a little. And if people love each other in the way that I think, which is unconditionally, I want the best for this person. I want them to experience life and be whole and full. And if they need to do something to do that, to become healthy in that way, I'll support it. And so sometimes the paths go apart for a while, because that's really important, because the work can't be done together. It's just,
Right.
we haven't seen the evidence that it's going to work like that, so they go apart. And if those people can still hold on to the love that they have for each other, there's a really good chance that they'll come back together, maybe in a different fashion, but both better for that time.
Right.